Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar hosted by Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Jews Can Shoot. I'm Doris Wise, President and Founder. We are very thankful that you can be here today, and we're sure that you will find the information you hear today educational and possibly even life-saving. The idea for this seminar came about after the Orlando nightclub shooting, where so many people simply hid in the bathrooms just waiting to die. They were misled to believe that hiding and doing nothing was their best chance for survival. What we now know for sure is that this was not an isolated incident and that it will happen again. We needed to learn from the best about threats in the modern world and how to better prepare ourselves to avoid being victims. And so we went out and got the best, the one and only Scott Kirshner. Scott has been a parole administrator, supervisory probation officer, and correctional officer. He has extensive experience as an officer survivor trainer and has been a lead defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor, and use of force instructor. In addition, he has written and taught numerous training curriculums on verbal de-escalation, applied defensive tactics, officer awareness and the tactical mindset, and low-light shooting tactics. Scott Kirshner holds a black belt in 3 styles of martial arts. He has also taught classes on evidence-based practices, motivational interviewing, and case management plans. He has a Bachelors of Science in Business and a Master's of Education in Counseling. Scott's book, Surviving Violent Encounters, Win, Survive, Prevail, provides practical and realistic information written in a focused and easily understandable style. It is definitely one of the best books available today, dealing with this frightening situation we have in our country. We are thankful that Scott has worked with us to create and set up this event. At the end of his presentation, he will take questions from all of us who have joined today. You will be able to type your question in a window that will appear at the end of the presentation on your screen. So, without further ado, I present to you Scott Kirshner.
Thank you, Doris. I appreciate that very beautiful introduction. I'm very excited to be here tonight. We have a lot of excellent information to go over. And as Doris said, we live in a violent world, and the days where people used to say, don't fight back, those days are gone. We can't afford not to fight back anymore. As we saw in the Orlando nightclub shooting, people are getting slaughtered. And part of the reason I wrote this book is because life is too precious. So let's get into this. A ton of good information. If you want, get a pen and paper ready, take some notes. At the end of the presentation, I'll have some contact information. If you want to contact me directly, we could do that as well. So the objectives I want to go over tonight is first, we're going to define what a dedicated threat is. And that's an important concept, the dedicated threat. We're going to discuss situational awareness, color codes, and the OODA loop process. And those 3 things are very interrelated and extremely important when it comes to safety. The other aspect we're going to talk about is the impact of both psychological and physiological reactions to stress. And that's a critical component, because when you are facing violence, you're going to be nervous. I don't care how well trained you are. It's just a natural response that your body is going to provide to you. And you can actually use some of those responses to your advantage. On the other hand, there are some of those responses that are negative to you. The other thing we're going to go over are self-defense requirements. And these are things that you're going to have to kind of commit to right now, that in the face of a violent encounter that you're willing to do. We're going to discuss some realities of human conflict, targets to attack, and we're briefly going to go over some weapons for self-defense. So today, what we're talking about is the worst case scenario against a dedicated threat. And I've defined a dedicated threat as a person or persons whose main goal, desire, and motivation is to severely injure or kill you by any means necessary. By the mere definition of that, that is the worst case scenario. When you're confronted with somebody who we would term a dedicated threat, you have no other option but to fight back. At that point, The ability to avoid the situation is long gone, and your avenue of escape may not exist. I see too many times that there's a focus on, I could just avoid everything. Well, we know that that's not true. We can't avoid everything. Even people who tend to have good situational awareness can't avoid all situations. Look at police officers that are ambushed. An ambush, by its very nature, was not really avoidable in the mere fact that it happened. So today we're going to really be focusing on that dedicated threat who wants to hurt you. You couldn't avoid the situation, and escaping is not a possibility for you. Before we get into that, though, we really need to take an honest look at us internally. And this is very hard for a lot of people because human psychology, we kind of tend to want to view ourselves sometimes better than what we really are, and that works against us. So I say preparation starts with you, and you have to ask yourself, are you prepared to respond to violence? Are you mentally prepared? Do you practice any kind of visualization or imagery of violent encounters where you're going to prevail? Are you physically prepared? If you have skills, are you confident in your skills? That's a huge one. I have seen people who have such a level of talent in shooting, fighting skills, but they're not confident in those skills. So even though when there's no stress, there's no pressure, they can perform exceptionally well. As soon as you put in stress, that confidence level goes. And when that goes, focus goes as well. And that's not good. So not only do you need to have skills, you need to have confidence in your skills, and you need the ability to remain focused so that you can use those skills. The other thing is, depending on where you live, do you know what the self-defense laws are in your area? Every jurisdiction has a self-defense law that says under these circumstances, you are allowed to defend yourself, and there's justifiable homicide, that you can kill another person if your life is in danger or somebody else's life is in danger and you're protecting them. Do you have any type of self-defense skills? Do you have firearm skills? Do you exercise regularly? Do you eat healthy? Do you get enough sleep? Uh, a lot of studies show that the average person does not sleep enough. And even if you think that you wake up with 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep or 6 hours of sleep, the research shows that people need 7 to 8 hours minimum of solid sleep per night. Then there's the other thing. Do you smoke? Do you drink alcohol? Do you abuse prescription medications? If you go to a website such as rxlist.com, it'll tell you the most prescribed medications. And I can tell you that a lot of those medications are medications that are being abused. So if your doctor tells you to take one pill every 4 hours and instead you choose to take 4 pills every 1 hour, that's a problem. So when you look at this list, answer some of those questions with an open mind, because your lifestyle can impact your ability to respond to a dedicated threat. So one of the things before we even get into this whole thing, I'm going to ask you to make a commitment right now that you will commit to win. That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, right now, before we even get into all the information that I'm going to provide you, knowing what you know now about yourself and the world we live in, you have to commit to yourself cognitively in your brain that you're going to commit to win no matter what happens. What this means is, I don't care if you're a smoker and you smoke a pack of cigarettes every hour. If you're faced with that dedicated threat, you're not going to give up. You're going to keep going. If you drink a lot, if you have a disability, if you're not in the best physical shape, if you have medical problems that prevent you from working out or being just the best that you can be, because at the end of the day, I'm just asking you to be the best that you can be, and with whatever gifts and talents that you have, that you're going to make that commitment to win, so that when you're faced with any kind of a threat, you're not going to lay down and die. You are going to continue to fight and keep going. And one book that I wrote is a book called Goal Setting for Law Enforcement Officers. Be a survival-oriented officer. A lot of people they know where they want to be. I want to be in great shape. I want to quit smoking. I don't want to drink. I want to work out more. I want to eat healthy. I want to be a firearms expert. We have all of these goals. We know where we want to be, but we don't know the path to use to get there. This book will clearly tell you how you do that. And whether you're a law enforcement officer or not, the information in this book will provide all the answers that you need. So don't get wrapped up in that title for law enforcement. You don't have to be a law enforcement officer. You just have to have a goal that you want to accomplish, and this book will tell you how to get to it. So as we move on, I expect that everybody that's watching this right now, that you've already made that commitment to win. And the reason I'm asking you to make that commitment to win is because the reality is hope is not a survival strategy. If you're hunkered down in the bathroom at an Orlando nightclub and somebody's outside your door and you're not doing something proactive for your survival, hope gets you nothing. It gets you dead. You have to be proactive because violence is ugly, it's brutal, and it's toxic. And if you don't do anything when you are faced with violence, you will be a victim. You'll be a victim. On the other hand, just because you respond and do something does not guarantee success. But what we do know is if you choose not to do anything, you will be a victim. So again, hope is not a survival strategy. It should not be in our vernacular when we talk about this. You got to make that commitment to win. You have to be willing to face violence and respond even when you don't know what the outcome is going to be, because there's no guarantee. The only guarantee is if you choose not to do anything, you will be a victim, and that's not okay. So let's talk a little bit about survival mindset. And one thing I will say, when I was a law enforcement officer and I was an officer survival instructor, one of the things that I always focused on is survival mindset. And that's kind of how I came up with my little slogan, commit to win, win, survive, prevail. It all starts in your mind. I'll never forget, many years ago, I was teaching a martial arts class. And back in that time period, I was in excellent shape, and I was tiring everybody out. And after an hour of a brutal physical workout, doing martial arts and stuff, there was one guy who was about 6'4", 240 pounds, who was barely sweating. And it boggled my mind. How is this guy not dying like everybody else in the class? And it was the first time I met this guy. And after class, I talked to him and stuff. And turns out he was a retired Navy SEAL. And at the time, I didn't believe him because everybody says they're a Navy SEAL and stuff. But one of the things that I learned from this guy that took me a long time to really understand, but I get it now. He said, the will to win beats the skill to win. And that's something, if you have a pen and paper, write that down. The will to win beats the skill to win. And that talks directly to the concept of mindset. So mindset is possessed by people who have the ability to screen out distractions while under great stress, to focus on the tasks necessary for the survival against great odds if necessary. That goes hand in hand with that dedicated threat. So mindset is everything. When you are developing your mindset, you have one goal in mind: decisively win and prevail when engaged in a life-threatening situation, regardless of the source of the threat, regardless of factors that you do not control. So you are going to go through that worst case scenario, and your mindset is going to be that you will never give up. If you get shot, you know what? If you're breathing, you keep going. If you get punched and it hurts, you keep going. If you get stabbed, you keep going. You don't stop fighting for your life. And that's literally what you're doing, is you're fighting for your life. You don't stop fighting for your life until you have no life left to continue to fight. And that's an important concept. That is your survival mindset. You decisively win, you decisively prevail. You don't give up. I will tell you this, as an officer survival instructor, I have viewed hundreds, if not thousands, of real world violent incidents. And I am amazed, literally still to this day amazed, how many people willingly give their life to somebody else and don't fight for their life. And to me, I find that unacceptable. And it's unacceptable for me, and it should be unacceptable for you as well. So commit to win. Let's talk into the topic of situational awareness. Situational awareness is a topic that I talk about all the time, and I have a Facebook page, and we'll get to that later, and it's a topic that comes up a lot. And I've just come to this belief that many people live under this belief that they are much more situationally aware than they really are. Again, it's that honest self-reflection. People have a hard time. We think of situational awareness as being an easy skill. Situational awareness is not necessarily an easy skill. Um, it needs to be developed like any other skill, and like any other skill, situational awareness needs to be refined. It's something that you have to continually work on. You don't do it once and then you just say, hey, I'm always situationally aware, because that's not the case. And I will tell you this, even people who are exceptionally situationally aware will have certain points throughout the day where they are unaware. So it's a skill, and like any other skill, you have to work at learning how to become situationally aware and how to maintain it. I think the military, through the Department of the Army, has one of the best definitions of situational awareness. And let me read this to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. It's knowledge and understanding of the current situation, which promotes timely, relevant, and accurate assessment of friendly, competitive, and other operations within the battle space in order to facilitate decision making. An informational perspective and skill that fosters an ability to determine quickly the context and relevance of events that are unfolding. Now, they talk about a battle space. For you and I, as non-military individuals, this definition still applies to interpersonal violence. Now, the military uses it in a much more broader sense, but everything that they say in here still applies to us. Knowledge and understanding of the current situation. When we have that, that means that we need to have timely, relevant, and accurate assessment of what are friendlies by us doing, what are the threats doing, and what is going on in the area that I'm currently in. This is absolutely an important skill to have, the situational awareness. So, situational awareness promotes knowledge and understanding of the situation, an assessment of what's going on, and ultimately what you need to do is facilitate some kind of a decision. What am I going to do with all the information that you get? If you acquire too much information, you're going to have what's called information overload. If you don't have enough information, you're not going to have enough information to make potentially the right decision of what you need to do. So it's really about understanding the context and relevance of all of the information that you gather. That's what makes situational awareness hard. It's more than just the concept, I know who's in front of me, behind me, beside me, potentially where I'm located, above me or below me. It's more than that. It's knowing what are they doing and what does the battle space look like. If you fail to have situational awareness, or if you fail to maintain situational awareness, it absolutely mitigates your ability to solve problems. And the problem with that is if your problem is violence, you could be injured or killed. You cannot respond to a threat that you do not even know exists. Remember that. You cannot respond to a threat that you do not know exists. So the concept of situational awareness is a skill that needs to be learned, practiced, and refined consistently. You never get there. It is a day-to-day practice. It's a day-to-day battle to remain situationally aware. So now we're going to go over color codes. And color codes was developed by Colonel Jeff Cooper. And there are different types of color codes out there. The one that we're going to go over today is one that I used in law enforcement, and it's really a pretty popular one. Color code white. White just means you're unaware, you have no idea what's going on in your environment. When you're out in society, you should not be in condition white. Here's a good example on this photo here of two court security officers who are talking, and that person comes up and grabs that officer's gun, or attempts to grab it. He never gets it. Unacceptable behavior. These are supposedly professionals working in a job where they are paid to be situationally aware, and they both literally let somebody walk up to them and grab or attempt to grab that firearm. And that's not acceptable. Then there's condition yellow. You're alert. You know what's going on around you. You're calm and you're relaxed. This is where your thought process is, your mindset is, today might be the day I'm attacked. And if it is, I'm ready, willing, and able to respond appropriately in a timely manner within the confines of the law, and I refuse to be a victim. You commit to win. Anytime you are outside the comfort and safety of your home, you should be in condition yellow. Condition orange is just where you sense something is not right. So you mentally key in on something, and this is where there's a law enforcement seminar called Caliber Press Street Survival Seminar, and they have a saying, when then thinking. This is where you say, when this person does that, then I'm going to do this. So you know what that red line in the sand is. Condition red is where that potential threat is now a real threat to your safety, and the fight is on. So now you're taking immediate and decisive action to either neutralize the threat, disengage and retreat if safe, and get help. Now for men, they have a real problem with that whole disengage and retreat, because we let our ego dictate our response. We can never allow our ego to dictate our response. We got to do what we need to do in order to survive. And then the last color code is condition black. And this is where you are so overwhelmed by fear that you take no action at all. So if you were to ever enter condition black against a dedicated threat, not a good situation. The next part of this is the whole OODA loop. And OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And when you observe, what you have is two combatants get into this cycle. Whoever observes first is going to have the immediate advantage. If you're not looking, you don't move through the cycle. That's a real problem. Again, observation is that condition yellow and maintaining situational awareness. Orient is where under pressure you see what's going on. Then you move on to decide. And in decide, you either make a conscious decision of what you're going to do, or you make a subconscious decision. A subconscious decision is a better decision, typically based upon training. You've trained, you respond, you react, you know what to do. Conscious is a slower decision, because when you make a conscious decision, you have to cognitively think about what is it I'm going to do, and then you go to act. After act, then you're back at observe. So this OODA loop is a continuous loop that keeps on going. The predominant factor in the OODA loop is to observe first and be faster than your adversary, so that they are responding to information that is no longer relevant. We all have the same amount of time. So whoever processes through the OODA loop fastest tends to do better. Now here's a good slide where you have an OODA loop, but so does your threat. So on your OODA loop, you can observe, orient, decide, or act, but if you're behind the curve and your threat has jumped the gun on the OODA loop, then you have failed to observe. You could be disoriented, indecisive, and failure to act. That is not good. And then it gets more complicated. If you're dealing with multiple threats, you have an OODA loop, and every threat that you deal with has an OODA loop. So now not only do you have an OODA loop, you're dealing with multiple people's OODA loop, and that means that you have to decide which threat becomes your priority. Sometimes it's the threat that's closest to you, but not always. Proximity is only one factor in that. Let's talk about psychological and physiological reactions to stress. Again, when faced with violence, you are going to be nervous. And the three psychological reactions are the fight, flight, and freeze. And we've all heard this. If you have to fight, use force that's reasonable and necessary and legally justified under the circumstances. That's fine. Flight, if you can leave, I want to stress, we're talking today a lot about dedicated threat, where you don't have the ability to leave. But when there are other times when you have the ability to leave, please do so. There's no need for you to willingly place yourself in a situation where you are using force, where you could face legal consequences, or you can lose that fight and lose your life. So if you can leave, there's no shame in that. Again, don't let your ego dictate your response. Okay? And then freeze. Freeze is never a good response. Now, the only time you see freezing work effectively is in the animal kingdom, because some of the predators don't have good eyesight, and what they see is movement. So if an animal freezes in place, the predator doesn't see him, and then the animal is fine. For human beings, that doesn't work. So if you ever catch yourself in a freeze moment, you got to get out of that really quick and get back to fight or flight. So under extreme stress, one of the things that you're going to have happen is your heart rate is going to go up. And when your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up as well. You Part of the things that you're gonna feel is your dexterity and coordination will be reduced. This is because your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, adrenaline and other hormones are released into your blood pressure. So heart rate spikes, blood pressure spikes, and your breathing increases. Some of the bad effects that you might suffer from that is something called auditory exclusion. And auditory exclusion is where your hearing kind of shuts off and you don't hear what's going on around you. So let's say you're with a family member or you're with somebody else who's trained with a firearm and they're giving you a verbal command to do something, or they're telling you that you're going to do something, you might not hear it because of the stress. The other one is visual exclusion can occur. And that's where you visual exclusion is the loss of peripheral vision. So it's like taking toilet paper rolls and you're looking through them, but you lose everything out. That's why it's important. When you go to firearms training, they always say scan after shooting. It's to break that visual exclusion so that you have situational awareness of your battle space. One of the best things that I'm going to tell you tonight is this exercise. It's a breathing exercise. It goes by different names: combat breathing, autogenic breathing, tactical breathing, whatever. It's a skill. So when you get stressed out, what you want to do is you want to practice breathing for a 4 count. So you would go in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, wait 2, 3, 4, and you would repeat that. Now, if you're sitting there, you're thinking in the middle of a crisis, I'm not going in 2, 3, 4, and that's true. This is a skill that you should be practicing now, so that in a crisis, you already know how the process works and that you've already developed it. This is one of the most effective things. I've done this in force on force training where you're nervous, you're doing maybe a building search, and you're practicing with non-lethal training ammunition, such as munitions. And if you get shot with that, it hurts. It's not going to kill you, but it hurts. It gets you amped up. This breathing exercise does work very effectively. So let's now move on to self-defense requirements. This is going to be hard for some of you, but yet it's absolutely critical. So in order to prevail in a violent encounter, there are some things you have to come to terms with. The number one thing is the willingness to take action, even though it might result in personal injury. There's no guarantee that what you're going to do is going to be effective, but you have to be willing to stand up and fight for your life or the life of loved ones that are with you. Number two, accept the fact that evil exists and society has predators that will prey on us. We see this all the time. We saw it in San Bernardino. We saw it in France. We saw it in Orlando. We see this every single day. Predators live in society, and we can't ignore that fact. Number three, you have to be willing to injure or kill another human being when justified. That's a huge hurdle for people. Most of us are good, hard-working, honest people who don't get up in the morning and go, today might be the day I'm going to kill somebody. We don't wake up with that. But if you're faced with violence, you have to be willing to go there. And that's a decision that you should make today if you haven't already made it. Like I told you earlier, all states have laws that are justifiable laws that allow you to use violence under certain circumstances. Number four, have that commit to win mindset. You are never going to give up. You are going to win, survive, prevail, no matter what. If you're shot, you're stabbed, you're bleeding, you're hurt, you're tired, you don't give up, you never quit. Okay? Having that survival mindset makes you a very capable adversary. And it's like that Navy SEAL I talked about earlier. The will to win beats the skill to win. Think about that. That's an important concept. Number five, and I've seen this probably thousands of times. You cannot assume that somebody's going to step up and help you. You know, we live in a society now where people will report your death or you getting beat or somebody else. They won't put that phone down to call 911. They won't put that phone down to help you. They'd rather record it. A guy who was stabbing his wife, 3 onlookers are standing right there. He kills her. They walk away, and that's it. All 3 of those people have the ability to snap. Realities of human conflict. So in my years of studying violence, I've come to 3 realities about violence. Number 1, the threat will be closer than you want them to be, and they're typically a lot closer than you train for. Too many people tend to train at distances way too far when threats tend to be very close. The situation will escalate very quickly, and it turns violent extremely fast. That's when you talk about training, you need to be training for this. Very close, very fast, and very violent. That's your goal. You know, here's a situation, and this is actually the cover of my book, Surviving Violent Encounters. I have no idea what's going on in this photo, other than this guy's got 3 people with large edge weapons against him. They are dedicated threats. If they can get to this guy, I'm sure he will be dead. So, types of attacks. Remember this. There's many ways you could be attacked. You could be punched, grapples, tackles, multiple opponents. They could use weapons. They could use a combination. You don't control how you're going to be attacked. Okay? You don't get to dictate the attack, but you get to choose your response to the attack. And that's why training is so vitally important. Reactionary time. Action is faster than reaction. And I've seen this proved thousands of times in real world violence. Action is faster than reaction. So what we're really saying here is in relation to violence, your reactionary time is defined as the elapsed time between an external stimulus and your response to that stimulus. It's the time that it's going to take you to see what's going on, cognitively process it in your brain, and then react to it. If you are close to somebody and you get hit initially, you have to survive that initial attack. That could be a real problem, you know? So reactionary time can be impacted by things such as your level of situational awareness. The more you have, the better you are. Your level of training, skills, and experience, the distance that you are to other people, and the aggressiveness of the attacker. Distance is your friend. You know, and that's important. You don't always get to choose that. If you voluntarily walk into an elevator with somebody, you're in a confined space. You're where you are. So you don't have that luxury of distance. So sometimes you get trapped into that. When you're training, always keep in mind to train for situations that are very close where you're going to have that limited reaction time. And too many people don't really do that. Let's talk about multiple attackers. And the reason I want to throw this in here is I'm seeing more and more cases of violence that's occurring by multiple attackers. So where escape is not possible and you can't avoid the situation and you're being confronted by multiple attackers, that's a very, very dangerous situation. So your only solution is you have to act aggressively, decisively, and rapidly. And I use a term that I like to say, attack the attacker. You hit first, you hit fast, you hit hard, you hit repeatedly, and you repeat that process over until you're safe. So your mindset when you're dealing with multiple attackers is that you're going to win, not just take out a few of them. Okay. Again, it always comes down to that mindset. You want to avoid getting encircled by a group of people. You never want anybody to get behind you. You want to use movement that's fluid, dynamic, and unpredictable. Okay. You don't want them picking up on what you're going to do. But yet you have to maintain a stable fighting platform that provides you protection, mobility, and stability. And you want to use short, quick strikes. Don't leave your punches out there. Don't leave your kicks out there. When possible, strike two people at once. So you might jab one person in the eye as you're kicking another person in the groin. Be unpredictable so that the person, the group can't read you. And if possible, sometimes with multiple attackers, there's so many of them that they get in the way of each other. Use that to your benefit. Some of the targets you would want to think about is eyes, throat, groin, solar plexus, and knee joint. Don't go for the big knockout, okay? You don't have time to focus on, I'm going to get that big punch in there or whatever. If you get knocked down to the ground, your number one priority, and I can't stress this enough, is you got to get up as soon as possible. If you have situational awareness, you should have been looking for weapons of opportunity. You should know what's in your environment. And if you have barriers in your environment, use those barriers as well. So here's an example of multiple attackers with two attackers and you. So in this situation, we're going to just say that you would attack the person that's attacker number one, who's closest to you. If possible, reposition attacker number one so that he's in between you and attacker number two. So you're just using a real easy tactic to help keep you a little bit safer. Avoid being what I call monkey in the middle, where you have people on either side of you. And obviously, you never want to become encircled when you're dealing with multiple attackers, because that 360-degree security is very, very hard to maintain. Next part, never, and I can't stress this enough, never, ever, ever allow yourself to become restrained, tied up, bound, or controlled in any manner. It never works to your benefit. And once you do that, in many of the videos I've seen, the outcome is more often than not death. So the next slide is a little bit graphic, so if you choose not to watch it, just turn away for a second, and then when we're past it, I will let you know. So here's an individual whose legs and arms are tied, severely beaten. Now, this person wasn't killed, but it's clear to see he has a swollen eye, his face and lips are swollen. He took a pretty brutal beating. So on to the next slide. The graphic slide is off now. Once you're restrained, you are at the mercy of the person that's restrained you, and we don't want to do that. So if somebody attempts to restrain you, immediately, decisively, aggressively, violently, brutally, fight back. Anybody who attempts to restrain you, even if you're being attacked by people with a mob, even if or a mob, or people with weapons, you have no other choice, because once you're restrained, you have zero ability to defend yourself. That is literally probably the worst case scenario. So the next two slides are extremely graphic. So here we have ISIS, and they're playing their little games where they tie people up and they're beheading people, and here they're executing them with a gunshot to the head. And the next slide, both of these guys are restrained. One guy's getting his head cut off with a knife, and the other guy is a chainsaw. This is the world we live in, folks. This is a dedicated threat. These are the worst case scenarios. You got to commit to win, because this type of evil exists, and it's unacceptable. Next thing, avoid the ground. Now, ground fighting, boy, since the mixed martial arts craze has hit, ground fighting is the big thing. And I want to say this, if you do ground fighting, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there is nothing wrong with it. It's a great skill to have. It's a great skill to know how to use. In a real-world fight, though, you never want to be on the ground fighting somebody, because you can only be effective with one person at a time, and generally, you're not fighting one person at a time. It's not a sporting event. So other people can be kicking, punching you, and beating you with an object. So if you end up on the ground, your number one goal is defend yourself and get up as soon as you can. Protect your vital things, your eyes, your throat, your groin, your neck, your spine. You got to get up. This is something you should be practicing, that if you get knocked down to the ground, that you get up as soon as you possibly can. The longer you're on the ground, the more chances that you're going to get hurt. So get up as soon as possible. Even if you are in a fight that appears to be a one-on-one fight, I've just seen too many instances where other people get involved and they jump in, and now it's not you and one other person. It's you versus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people, and that's not a fair fight. And we shouldn't be fighting fair to begin with. But you don't want people not fighting fair to you. So here, good example, on the ground, not a good place to be. On the ground, so look at that. We have a crowd of onlookers. This guy's getting hit with a stick, and there's another person on the ground that's already unconscious. So here we have a guy who's on the ground surrounded by 8 people with sticks who have been hitting him. Okay, you can't win a fight on the ground. So you got to get up and you got to attack. Real world violence is in the game. This isn't the cage. This isn't mixed martial arts. There are no rules or no referees. The consequences are real. So going back to the beginning of this is you have to make that commitment to win. So some guiding safety principles. Number 1, be aware of your environment, that whole situational awareness. Avoid getting hit first when possible. When possible, hit first, hit fast, hit hard, hit repeatedly. Uh, when I say that, I'm saying to do that legally within the confines of the law. I'm not saying to take the law into your own hands. You want to incapacitate the attack so that they're no longer a threat to your safety, which means you want to use speed, surprise, and justified violence, and get to safety as soon as you can and without placing yourself in further jeopardy. Targets to attack, eyes, throat, and groin. And the goal with the eyes, throat, and groin are 3. You want to remove that person's will to fight, their capacity to fight, hopefully both. When you perceive that your life is in danger, you have to act with aggression, determination, commitment, ferocity, speed, decisiveness, if necessary, brutality. It's that commit to win. Okay, remember, we're focused today on that dedicated threat, somebody that wants to hurt you by any means necessary and potentially kill you. So while these words don't legally sound good, this is the worst case scenario where somebody's trying to kill you. So the idea behind attacking the eyes is you eliminate vision. If somebody can't see you, they're going to have a really hard time fighting you. The throat inhibits breathing. Somebody can't breathe, they're going to be more focused on grabbing air than they are fighting you. I've been in a fight once when I was a little kid and I got punched in the throat, and I just, to this day, I will never forget what that feels like. The fight was over at that point. I was just like, I want to breathe, and adults will be like that as well. And the groin is extreme pain. You want to cause a lot of pain. Now, when we talk about these 3 areas, eyes, throat, and groin, that doesn't mean you just do one. You do them all. You do them repeatedly. If you go to strike somebody in the eyes and the throat, they're going to protect their head. As they protect their head, you kick them in the groin. As they go to protect their groin, you poke them in the eye and you punch them in the throat. So you might have to alternate levels, eyes, throat, and groin. Talk about weapons. Now, I'm an advocate, huge advocate of the Second Amendment. I love the Second Amendment, and there's a reason that the Second Amendment is number 2, right behind the First Amendment. And I hope that you all know your history on why that is. We live in a world where I would say that if you live in an area where that you are legally allowed to carry a firearm, carry a firearm. And while I respect the ability to carry unconcealed, I only would recommend that you carry concealed. If you can carry a knife, carry a knife. There are other things, depending on where you live. You can carry OC spray, batons, a tactical pen, a flashlight, and again, weapon of opportunity. And the way you know weapons of opportunity are because you will have situational awareness. One of the things I'm going to ask everybody to do tomorrow, when you go to your place of work, or if you no longer work, when you're out and about in society, I want your whole day to focus on weapons of opportunity because you're surrounded by weapons all of the time. You just might have to think about things a little bit different and reprocess what you think is a weapon and what could be used as a weapon of opportunity. You're never weaponless. There are weapons everywhere. And I want you to start recognizing those weapons in your environment. One of my new favorite weapons is a Glock 43. I'm a big fan of Glock. I've carried a Glock 19 for years. When I worked in law enforcement, I shot tens of thousands of rounds through Glocks and never really had problems with them. Good, accurate firearm. My preferred carry is appendix style. Doesn't mean that's how I always do it. Sometimes I do strong side hip and stuff. Good method to carry. Very fast, very easy, and relatively comfortable, depending on if you have a good holster. Another thing is tactical pen. Okay, and I love how they call them tactical pens. It could be, you know what? Here's just look at this, a Jews can shoot pen right here. And this can be a great pen. You know, we still don't want this in your eye. You don't want this in your eye. You don't want this in your throat, in your neck. Any kind of a pen, okay? Light. Always carry your flashlight. When we think about the events that occurred on 9/11/2001, if you read the 9/11 Commission report, one of the recommendations were that if people had a flashlight, probably a lot more people would survive going down the stairs. So light is good, but light can be used tactically. Here are two photographs. One is me, and I didn't know what was going on. So this is not a staged photograph. We were doing some drills and stuff, and I have a big butcher knife in my hand. But look what happens. And the photo to the next, it's the same thing. Everybody does the same thing. Hands come up, you shut your eyes, you turn away. That might provide you enough time to get into their OODA loop cycle. Remember, observe, orient, decide, act. So if they're on the aggressive and you shine a light in their eye and you reset them back to observe, the will to win beats the skill to win, and that's how you do it. So let's wrap it up, folks. We're almost done with our summary here. Mindset is everything. You can never afford to give up. Don't give your life away. Somebody's trying to hurt you or a family member or a loved one or a friend. That's not okay. So you have to do something. Mindset is everything. Situational awareness. I want you to reevaluate your level of situational awareness and the skills that you have on that. Continually work on it. Under no circumstances should you ever allow yourself to become restrained. Nothing good ever comes out of that. So if somebody attempts to restrain you, fight back right away, because you're probably going to have a bad day otherwise. Attack first, attack fast, strike hard, and strike repeatedly. Start identifying weapons of opportunity in your environment. And at the end of the day, folks, there is no substitute to prevailing in a violent encounter. So if you want to contact me, my personal email is officersurvival@cox.net. And in just a couple of minutes, we're going to, right after the slide, we will do Q&A. So if you have any questions, start thinking about that. I have a Facebook page. It's called Officer Survival for Probation and Parole Officers, but it's not limited just to probation and parole officers. So you're more than welcome to come to that page. I do focus a lot on survival issues that aren't necessarily just related to probation and parole officers. If you want to get my book, Surviving Violent Encounters, I would love you to do that. It's available on Amazon. It's the only place you can get it. And at this point, we will do. We'll move on to the question and answer phase. So one of the questions that I have here, and let me read it to you, is in looking back at San Bernardino and Orlando, what went wrong other than the commonality of gun-free zones? Well, and that's a great question. And first I'll say is I do not support gun-free zones at all. Gun-free zones are what I call target-rich environments. It just eliminates your ability to protect yourself. When we look at San Bernardino, there was a neighbor that saw that something was going on in their garage, but they didn't want to call the police in order to avoid being labeled something. So we've become an overly politically correct world, and that allowed San Bernardino to happen. In Orlando, as Doris said at the beginning of this, there were people in the bathroom floor on the phone with 911 as they got slaughtered. They didn't fight back, and you have to fight back in these things. So a lot of things going on. So let me get to another question. So I have a question here. If adrenaline causes someone to freeze, what is the best way to get out of that freeze? And that's from KR. KR, that is a great question, and I have an answer for you. So The psychological things that you're going to do is that fight, flight, or freeze. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you are not very well trained, and that's an assumption on my part because I don't know necessarily. It would be common for somebody to freeze when faced with extreme levels of stress. The way you have to deal with that is you have to cognitively recognize it as soon as possible and get out of it. So it's that oh shit factor, right? The startle flinch, oh, something's going on, and you freeze and you become panic stricken. What you have to do is you have to just cognitively accept that for what it is and then change that mindset to this is not productive for me. That I'm going to do one of two things now. I'm going to fight or I'm going to flee. And either one of those is acceptable if you have the ability to flee. What I tell people when I worked in law enforcement, this was a question that came up a lot, that freeze factor. And these were law enforcement officers that were very highly trained. And I would tell them, if you freeze, you have about a half of a second to get out of it. So the other thing that will help you is reality-based, realistic scenario-based training, stress inoculation training. Training helps ward off that freeze. So great question. We have another question. Where can I practice these skills? Are there classes somewhere? That depends on where you live, and I don't know where you live, but this is what I will say is there are now so many schools out there that provide critical life-saving classes, and Jews Can Shoot is an option for people as well. She lives in Los Angeles, so I don't know anybody in Los Angeles because I'm located in Phoenix, Arizona. I don't know anybody off the top of my head. What I would recommend you do, we've been at war for a long time. I would recommend that you find somebody who's been in the military who has a legitimate school and seek them out. There are so many places now, so many. I live in Arizona, and I'm so fortunate out here. We have so many great organizations that do training. Uh, there's just a plethora of places. You'd have to do some research and look into that. Let's take some other questions here. So here's one. How should one train their survival skills? That's kind of a general question, but what I would say is when it comes to training survival skills, don't just train. Have a goal and know exactly what it is that you are looking to improve. And part of that goes back to identifying what are your weaknesses. When you identify your weaknesses, work on strengthening those out. And the way I recommend you do that is through goal setting. Write out a goal, exactly outlining what it is that you want to do. Another question, what should somebody do during an active shooter incident? My answer to that is really easy. Survive, because you don't have any other choices. Now, there's a common mantra out there right now called run, hide, fight. And run, hide, fight was not a bad mantra, but I don't think, in my personal opinion, that it was taught correctly, because most people learned it sequentially, that I must run, I must hide, or I must fight, and then I must fight. And you have to go through that progression. And that's not necessarily how it should be. Your default, well, my default now is I'm ready to fight 100% of the time, all of the time. But if other options exist that I don't have to fight, that I can run and I can get my family out of there, I have no pride. I have no ego. I will run if I have to do that. I have no problem doing that. Somebody say maybe Jews Can Shoot can bring me out to Los Angeles. You know what? That is always a possibility that we can do that. So in an active shooter situation, I think our default mindset now has to be that your first priority is fight, but you will adapt to the situation. If other options exist, you're not working up to the fight. Your default is aggression. Your default is I will fight. But if I don't have to, then you don't. So there are no other questions. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap this up? Audrey, you are amazing. Thank you for that offer. I appreciate it. And Laura as well. Apparently, a few people want to bring me out to LA, so maybe that's something I could talk to Doris and we can look into doing. Hold on. This is a great question. At what age is good to start to teach my grandchildren about this? Um, that is a great question. And I always say that when you're talking about violence, you have to teach it in an age-appropriate manner. Because if you teach children that the world is a scary place, even though it is, you're going to raise children that grow up with anxiety, and we don't want to do that. So do it in a way that's age appropriate so that they understand that bad people exist, that their safety is important, but not in a way that when you're not with them, that they're always going to be afraid. Because really what we want to do is we want to empower people, and we empower people through knowledge. And one of the best things I could think when you talk about with children and grandchildren, teach them situational awareness. Start telling them, hey, does that guy over there, is there anything wrong with that guy maybe? Or maybe we're not going to go over there. That guy looks a little sketchy to me. And we don't have to get into too much detail, but just to let them know. Oh, okay. So people want my contact information again. So my email address is officersurvival, all one word, officersurvival@cox.net, and that's cox.net. There we go. It's up. Um, and my Facebook page is Officer Survival for Probation and Parole Officers. If you know Doris, Doris can always get you in contact with me. And I will say this, I am very open to anybody emailing me or contacting me with any kind of questions, because this is a topic that's important to me. And Doris, thank you so much for having me on tonight. This was awesome.
You were very awesome. You should see the comments I've been getting throughout the whole thing. I cannot thank you enough. You and I are going to talk about bringing you out here and creating perhaps a 2-day class.
Okay.
Organizing is my singular talent, and that's what I'm going to do.
Awesome.
So thank you to everybody who joined tonight, and thank you for your patience. This is our first one, and a million thank yous to Scott for sharing his immense knowledge with us in this, and I agree, in this incredibly critical time, so that we will prevail and win and survive. Thank you all.
Thank you, Doris.
Good night.